And welcome once again to the Only You. I'm here in studio. Of course, Dr. Patino is in his office. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion on parenting and the effects of social media. How are you doing today, Doctor?
Hey, it's a good day, beginning of the week. Having to travel a little bit later in the week. I'm going to be in Houston, doing some of my forensic stuff. But I always enjoy getting out of town. For some reason, it's relaxing for me to get in the plane and traveling a little bit. But this topic we're going to be talking about today is raise some questions, and not without controversy, right? Because we have this tendency nowadays, especially in social media, and we are in social media, so we utilize the medium to deliver message, but there's a tendency to polarize things into
Mm.
the right and the wrong arguments, and the reality is that when it comes to parenting, it's all shades of gray, right? It's not a normal or abnormal type of thing, but it's about consistency and how we go about it, right?
And wouldn't it? I mean, it sounds to me like you've mentioned this before. I mean, just even from a coach's perspective, and a parent really is a coach. There's the coach's mentality, the coach's character, and what they do, but there's also the individual character of the players or the children that you have to adapt to. One coach's style does not fit with every kid. Is that correct?
Exactly. So we have let's leave social media aside just for a minute. When we look at the substrate, right? We call it the substrate of what we have to work with. You get this mold of clay that is a newborn, right? That it comes pretty empty. I mean, in terms of knowledge of the world, adaptation, reaction. So all is basically reptilian, right? I need to be fed. I need to have the connection. I need to feel safe. So we have to recognize that even in those circumstances, the substrate is different, right? There's different types of kids from the time they're born, and that's genetically ingrained. That is their biological personality. And that imprint is going to be there for the rest of our lives. We were children once, okay, and we had our own temperament. So we have, as parents, if we are to be successful at defining and providing an environment and an experience that is going to lead to the child being successful, well adapted, socially able, we had to recognize the differences in temperament, right? And it's very interesting because we as parents, we tend to naturally do that to some degree. But if we have somebody who gets kind of outside of the mall in terms of intensity, frequency of acting out, or difficulty with tantruming, then we tend to become challenged. So we have to recognize when we feel challenged by the substrate, which is the child, right? Because we have to adapt to make sure that we continue to provide consistency and boundaries, and making sure that that child recognizes the values that we're trying to imprint on them, right?
So, when you mentioned how social media is becoming very polarizing, the effect or the input of social media to these kids, is that a polarizing effect against their parents on occasion?
I think that I see that a lot more in early to mid adolescence, right? Because social media to some degree has become an extra friend, right? An extra opportunity for engagement, right? But it also opens up engagement with a lot bigger world. So that in itself, especially because of the nature of adolescence, the kids are going to be receiving information that they can certainly process intellectually, even though younger adolescents in a quite concrete way, but it opens up issues that they may not be able to deal with emotionally. So the difficulty that parents have with social media and the reaction of teenagers in particular is that the emotionality attached does not match the intellectual dilemma, right? So, in other words, let me say it in simplistic terms. Adolescents in general think as adults and behave like 3-year olds, right?
Mm.
And that's very confusing for parents because one moment the adolescent is having a conversation with you like if you're a friend, and exploring and discussing intellectually whatever topic it is. Could be sports, could be um, school, could be family, and all of a sudden you say something that the adolescent perceives as rejecting or critical of them, and they throw you a tantrum.
Mm.
And then you say, what happened, right? So it's very important to understand the dynamic that you cannot become yourself as a parent an adolescent, emotionally immature, and get into an emotional argument or imposing your opinion at the moment. I always have to say when an adolescent is behaving in a tantruming way, which is kind of scary sometimes because I mean they're intellectually capable and they have big bodies, so they're acting out. It's not like a 3-year old that you grab by the hand and get him out of the store, right? It's a little different.
Mm.
The last thing that you can do is to escalate that situation. So we have to learn as parents when to take a step back and pick your fight, right?
So how does a parent learn those skills? I mean, they're stressed with job, work, the kid himself. I mean, I personally witnessed some parents quite literally lose it and do some things that were kind of mind-boggling after being pushed to a certain extent. I mean, the amount of internal discipline that parent must have is significant. Where do they learn these things?
Well, you're supposed to learn those things as you're raising your kids. So
Ah,
when your kids are little, you're learning with them. You know, you're learning to provide the values and the transferring of information emotionally, socially, culturally, right? And in return, the kids are kind of training you to communicate, right? So you have to have a consistent way of parenting. In my experience, when I see problematic kids and problematic parents, and I see kids usually in the hospital ages 11 to 17, in the office probably 8 to 17, and there's a consistent dynamic of not learning as parents how to balance appreciation and frustration of the child.
mm,
The kid needs to be appreciated, but not excessively, and needs to be frustrated, but not excessively, right? So finding that right balance of appreciation and frustration without being sarcastic or rejecting it's a very important thing that parents need to learn with their kids, right? Now, you have to understand that there's not a perfect parent, right? There's no such a thing as school for parenting that you go to while you go into a pregnancy, right? That is going to teach you all the tricks because a lot of this is biological interaction and connection. So we all have baggage, we all have tools, we all have fears, we all have anxieties. But you cannot deal with those things of your own if you don't recognize that you have them.
mm. So I have read in the past, pre-industrial revolution, even at that certain level, just after that, they always talked about the grandparents being significantly more involved in raising the kids because the parents were working or hunter gathering or working the farms. Is that still a dynamic that you think would be beneficial because they've been through that process and maybe developed a little more maturity, a little bit more understanding of their emotions?
I'm a grandparent. I have 4 grandchildren, right? So, what I find interesting is for us as grandparents, if we're going to be participating in the helping, you know, of the transferring of information psychologically, socially, culturally, biologically, we have to recognize certain parameters. And the first thing that you have to recognize is that they're not your children
Mm,
and that you don't gain anything by criticizing the kid's parents because we are very prompt and very quick on telling our children, you know, you're not doing it right. You should do it my way. And what happens when you start on that path is that you're creating tension that distracts you from the purpose. So let's get back to the basics. What is the purpose of raising kids? is not a narcissistic endeavor in which I have to say I'm the best parent or the best grandparent. It's about the kid.
Mm.
It's about the kid growing healthy. And healthy doesn't mean perfect, it means balance. So they can confront their life and their social environment in a healthy way and live their lives. It has nothing to do with me as a grandparent. It should not have anything to do as my with my daughter as the mother of my grandkids. So it has to be about balance, right? So we have to establish the parameters probably before the kids are born, and this
Mm.
is a conversation that is hard to have. Very seldom, you know, a couple that has a child has a conversation with both sets of grandparents and saying, let's have a conversation about the how to, right? How are we going to work together? Maybe that's something we should write about, right? Maybe we should write a book about that.
I've been taking
Into
notes this whole time.
because it's important to set the plan. It is really fascinating. I said this last time we talked. It's really fascinating how little planning we do in terms of raising our kids. I've done. I mean, and I'm guilty of that too. I mean, I've done a lot more planning on developing my businesses than the planning I've done on raising the kids. You know,
It's just something you do, right? It's natural. So you don't need to plan. You just do it, right?
what it used to be, right? I mean, I mean, and I hate to talk too much about this because I don't like to compare, right? Because societies are different. We're evolving. We're developing our own ways. But we have to look at how it's done before. And I'm not talking about our own society. I'm talking about Native American cultures that have good and bad. I mean, Mexican American cultures in Central America and Southeast Mexico, South America, Africa. What is the common denominator among all those cultures? And is that there is a village that is raising the kids, and the kids are taught responsibility very early in life,
Mm.
right? So it becomes terribly important that we engage the kids, that the kids learn that they're part of something and that they're not an island on themselves. And that's the problem we've had in industrialized societies, is that the kid has become a thing that we have to manage and polish, right? It's not like a tree that we're trying to help grow. It's that we take it away from its roots and we put him in a box, and then we said, we're going to be taking you from one box to another box to another box because I have to protect you because you're fragile, you know, and there's too many risks in this world. So we remove and take away the independence of the kids. And that's one of the biggest sacrifices of this, right? So if we put him in boxes, in crystal boxes, and then we say you're fragile, right? If we take him to a soccer game and they're playing and somebody kind of crashes the box, then it is, what are you doing to my box?
Mm.
Instead of asking, what is my kid learning from the scratch, right? So then is when it becomes about the parents, about the box being polished and the product being perfect. And that is the worst we've done for our kids because they are intellectually very knowledgeable, but emotionally totally incapable.
And do you think the social media access allows them to escape a little bit that the box by reaching out beyond those things, even if they can't manage them emotionally, at least have some access?
Is there something good about social media? Absolutely. But we have to recognize that social media comes with good and bad. And when it comes to kids, my bias is it should be the parents' prerogative to be in control of it, not the kids. And the parents need to educate themselves to the risks associated with social media. And we have to recognize who are the kids who are more vulnerable, right? Kids who have been chronically abused, neglected. And neglect, I'm not talking about not paying attention to them. Sometimes paying too much attention is also a form of neglect,
mm,
right? Because you're preventing the child from being able to explore and to experience. And part of our nature is to explore and experience, right? So if you don't, if a kid never gets close to heat, right, he's never going to know that heat's dangerous. And I'm not saying that you should let your kids get burned, right? But they need to recognize, they need to experience heat, and they have to develop ways of coping with it, right? So the kid in the crystal box that is being protected from all the badness of the world and is constantly being polished is not experiencing a lot. It's getting a lot of information. So
mm.
that kid is vulnerable in social media, right? I mean, we have had different forms of social media since the 1930s, probably, right? It's just that this has become fast, fast to some degree, right? Because social media has not changed that much in the last 10 years.
Mm.
Okay? So I always find it fascinating that just now we figured out that social media has to change to accommodate its dangers. We've known this for many, many, many years. But now we want somebody to fix it, right? We can't fix it. We have to adapt to it and grow with it and recognize that the risk associated with it, right? But parents have to be part of the process, right? I mean, I can tell you that if tomorrow Congress or the world decides that social media is bad for kids and they shouldn't have access to it, do you think that the kids will not have access to it? So, because restrictions don't provide the how to, right? And the how to is a personal family responsibility that has to be based in good values. You see, something we have forgotten in this whole discussion, yeah, is purpose and values, right? So, what is the purpose of doing what we're doing? What are the values that guide the purpose? And I have to tell you, the values that guide our principles of life have not changed in 2000 years. It doesn't matter what religion or non religion you belong to. Actually, you don't have to have a religion to have good values.
Absolutely.
But we don't talk about values. We don't create based on values. And your values are intrinsic, they belong to you. Actually, and this sounds like a redundant statement, but values is what makes you valuable. And I have to tell you because I talk with kids or problem kids every day. Invariably, when I go and talk to a kid and I ask him, what makes you valuable? Kids between 11 and 17, invariably, they're going to tell me, I have pretty eyes. You know, I have a lot of followers in Facebook. You know, my friends like me. And
Those aren't values, though.
no. And I say, okay, can you tell me again what makes you valuable? I mean, I'm telling you the answer, right?
Mm.
No. So I have to say, well, are you a caring person? Yes. Are you a loving person? Yes. Are you good at working and planning? Are you industrious? Are you giving? Are you compassionate? Do you try to be understanding? What I find fascinating is most kids will say yes to all of those things, right? But they don't think those things have value.
Mm.
Yeah, they don't recognize that those are the things that take us into doing, right? And I tell them, when you're sitting down by yourself, feeling sad in your room, you're as valuable as when you're talking to your friends online because your values don't change. You're as valuable because you are, right? Unfortunately, in our society, we value doing more than being. And if you don't do or achieve, you're nobody. And actually, we bought into that. That's pretty sad.
And it's pretty consistent, especially in the Western developed cultures, about things and enjoyment. To something you said earlier about morals in particular and values being separate from religion. For some kids, I know someone in particular this happened to, parents who were very religiously driven versus just values, and their mores associated with that and the rules of the book that they chose to follow really clashed with this person as they were LGBT. And for them, the access to the internet and access to social media was a way to connect with others of their same kind and feel a little bit more normal, and also more accepted when they couldn't find that at home. Do you have experience with that with some of your patients?
Oh, a lot. First, because kids in the LGBT community tend to be overrepresented on kids that uh, have a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of gender dysphoria. Right. So it is not easy for them. It is difficult. Now, all of that said, I mean, for us in my business, we see them every day, several times a day. And we always have to maintain the neutrality and the respect of any of the gender or sex preference, any of that. We don't get into right or wrong with any of those things. Where it gets complicated is exactly the case you was presenting. When you have a child, right, who the parents don't like in terms of sex preference, gender, friends, social media participation, things like that, the kid perceives the not liking as not loving,
Mm,
right? And we've talked about this before. There's a difference between being liked and being loved. And there's a reverse situation in terms of, let's say you have a family who's very strict Christian or Muslim, you know, who will not accept anything that goes outside of their religion. So when you have a child in that environment, right, it becomes toxic in two directions, right? It becomes toxic in the direction that the parents don't want to have anything to do with it, even though they love the child. And from the child perspective, it feels unloved and becomes emotionally aggressive because it feels rejected and criticized, right? So the middle ground there is to say love should not be questioned. Acceptance is a process. You may achieve it or you may not achieve it. But if your bottom line is my parents have to change their morals because of me, that's a pretty high bar,
mm.
right? So because the parents, I mean, I ask kids the questions, why should they? You know that I tend to be very paradoxical in how I handle kids. I say, why should your patients accept your gender?
And what do they say?
They
That's
don't have an
interesting.
answer for that.
Mm,
So, but I ask that question because I want to get into the point of, well, maybe you should connect with them with love and not demand acceptance. Maybe the acceptance is something that may or may not happen, but you have to be willing to live with the idea that my parents love me, but they don't accept my gender. And that's okay. That is okay. It's not the end of the world, right? But you also have to explain it to the parents because, from the parents' perspective, there's a lot of fear,
mm,
right? Especially when you get into issues of what do I do if I don't do this? My kid's gonna commit suicide, right? And that is a lack of communication and lack of knowledge into the how to. And for starters, whether a parent is listening to us and is in the midst of a situation like this, you have to let your anger out and become somewhat neutral and understand what you're trying to achieve. If what you're trying to achieve, okay, is to impose your morality on your child, that's ripe for a great fight, right?
Well, it's the
And it's
ultimate ultimatum on both ends. You have to do it this way, or I'm gonna. You do it this way, or I'll kill myself. I mean,
yeah,
it's
and in the history of the world, usually that ends up with a war, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Always erupts into violence
and
or some
somebody
type
wins and
of
somebody
catastrophe.
loses. Is there a way that we can use more psychological diplomacy, right? In that you're not seeing the other side always as your enemy, right?
I think I was mentioning to you, and I think I sent it to you through Audible, the book I was listening to about negotiation. And one of the things, the points he made toward the end of the book was your counterpart, the person you're negotiating with or against or whatever, is it's not an enemy. It's simply a partner in a situation. And if you
Correct.
if both of you do it, work toward a settlement of some sort, both people are going to win in some way, and I don't mean the win-win. Just we're going to get what we both need to move on, and sometimes that means you get a better deal, the other person doesn't. But if you always see the other person as simply an enemy, you're never going to get anywhere. They're partners in coming to a conclusion through a negotiation or through discussion or whatever it is that moves things forward, even if one side loses a little bit.
Yeah, but you see something that I think I need to emphasize, and you're absolutely right in the process and the how to, but we have to understand that a parent-child relationships is a totally unequal relationship.
Mm,
Okay, we have a person with real power, and we have another minor person who thinks has power,
mm,
right? And the relationship is unequal. Now, the person with power is actually obligated to some degree because of experience and maturity to focus on purpose. What am I trying to achieve here? I mean, sometimes the purpose is as simple as keeping my child alive, right? And then you get to the next purpose is giving my child the tools that the kid needs to live a healthy life within the parameters and choices that they make. But then you have to recognize, and you need to help the child recognize you don't have as much power as you think you do. And with teenagers in particular, there is one power they have that they use frequently, and is the power to say no. Okay. So more often than not, they dig their heels and they become very defiant and very opposition, and you can't move them, right? So you have to be smart on how you're going to move them, right? With the purpose in mind of helping the kid, not on winning, right? Because it's the same situation you were describing. If you're going into a partnership dilemma with the idea that I have to win, well, first define what win means, right? And then maybe winning means settling, right? And that is becoming rare nowadays because the polarization that has been created by social media, right?
mm.
It's very easy to hide behind social media and avoid a dialogue, right? It's a lot different, I'm in the midst of some negotiations right now. We've been negotiating since April, right? And this is people that we're going to be partnering with, right? And we're I mean, now we're in November. How many months is that? 7,
Quite a bit.
right? And it's not that there's no fights, but there's always something that you have to be getting into, right? And everybody has to recognize that they can't get everything they want, right? And with the child, it eventually becomes a little easier because they don't have as much power as they think they have. Okay. But the kids need to recognize that the parents can be very restrictive,
Mm.
right? If the parents are afraid that the kid's a danger, right? And I mean, again, we deal with this every day, but I do feel that the approach of maintaining neutrality, you know, listening more and talking less, and being the smart in the decision making, always focus on what's best for the child, understanding that often the child does not know what's best for them.
Well, because as you said, they may be intellectually understanding it, but emotionally they don't, and they're not ready for it. So, being empathetic, as you say, listening, and maybe if there is that defiance, asking questions about the defiance instead of just saying, "Please obey me." It's more like, "Why aren't you obeying? Why are you digging your heels in?" To reveal the barriers, or at least the mindset of the child. Because again, back to this book I was listening to, it's all about finding what everybody wants and
Yeah.
understanding it. Once you understand it, then you can have a dialogue. When there are hidden desires, hidden meetings, hidden agendas, it's not possible to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, and it is extremely difficult to be successful when the person under your direction is like it's like in a business, right? You have to listen to what the person that works for you are telling you, even though you still have the final decision making, and you have to direct people. But we have to understand that we don't have to be critical or neglectful of the people that we have authority over, right? So how do we go about that? There's simple tricks that we use. If you ask my students how I ask questions, I very seldom ask why. And just a simple trick. I don't ask why because why is a criticism just by asking why.
Mm,
Because you're making a judgment, right? And how you say why, how you ask why can be perceived as aggressive, right? But I always ask kids, how come?
mm.
How come you're late? Because I'm not criticizing they're late. I want to understand the process, right? So how come you wanted to kill yourself versus why you tried to kill yourself, right?
It
So
also shows a level of empathy on your part.
exactly. So I think that parents need to start using how come a lot more and ask why less.
Okay.
Maybe in some cases will open up the communication. The other thing I think is important for parents to learn to ask without feeling that they're losing control or authority is to ask, how do you want me to help you? Right? I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Right? I mean, I have kids that come to the hospital and says, if you send me back to my dad, I'm going to kill myself. And I said, well, but if you don't go back to your dad, you won't. Right? So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Can we have a little conversation here with your dad and see what is it that makes you so mad about your dad?
Mm.
And I tell him these are not things that I deal with once in a blue moon. This is something that I deal with every day. So it's not easy. It requires tremendous amounts of patience, and it requires that you listen more and talk less.
Always great advice, doctor. Appreciate your time. Hopefully, we can continue some of these discussions.
Oh, we will.
Um, I think there's a lot to dig into. Again, this book that I sent you, hopefully you'll listen to. I think you'll see a lot of parallels to it. We appreciate all the listeners out there. Of course, please like, subscribe, and share. Of course, these are live shows, so when you want to ask a question on the comments, you may. If not, we'll look at the comments on the YouTube channel and get back to you on the next episode. Everyone, take care. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Good night. Bye bye.